Hi, Misha here, and last time we looked at Japan's first modern battleships, the Ise Class. And as I said in that video, it was originally to be a class of 4, but as it turned out, the last 2 in the class would end up being different enough that they would become their own class, the Ise Class. Now this model here is the Ise, but this is after her midlife crisis, so we'll talk about her in a minute. Here we have her sister ship, the last one of the 4 to be commissioned. This is the Hyūga. And basically, these are product improved Fusos. Approval to build 3 more Fusos was given in the spring of 1913, and while Yamashiro was laid down soon after, there was not funding to lay down the last 2. So they were approved, but no money. Finally, a little over a year later in the summer of 1914, with World War I on the horizon, and then happening, approval was given and money was given. But in the interim, a few things had happened. Fuso herself was well under construction and about to be commissioned. And there had been naval developments in Europe and elsewhere. So since they had the opportunity, they made some changes and refinements to the design. The biggest one, the gun placements. The Fusos have 6 turrets for main guns with a total of 12 14-inch guns. But the front and rear pair, while super firing, the middle pair are pretty obstructed and of limited utility. On top of that, because the turrets are spread out all over the ship, there had to be more armor, and the magazines were spread out more, and they were all between boiler rooms and things, just kind of all over the place. So when it came time to build the Ise, they combined to some extent the 2 middle guns, making a 3rd super firing pair, compacting them up a bit, putting them both on the same side of the funnel, and just generally making things all around better. The secondary guns were also changed. The Fuso had a 6-inch secondary gun battery. These guns were found to be a little slow to reload and whatnot, so they actually decreased the size down to 5.5 inches, but these had a faster rate of fire and a higher velocity round, so all in all more effective. They also made a few changes here and there to various things that they found, but those are the big ones. The only real downside, because of the new arrangement, the crew quarters were actually made less of the volume of the ship was taken up for that. The only problem is, whereas the Fuso had a crew of around 1,200, the Ise would have a crew of over 1,350. She would also be a little heavier at about 31,000 tons displacement and a little longer at over 680 feet. And she was capable of the same maximum speed of about 23 knots. So close in, but still different enough. The 2 ships were laid down in 1915, but would not go into service until 1917 and 1918. In fact, Hyūga here would miss World War I pretty much altogether. So one of their first major uses was to help with the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923. After that, both would be in and out of reserve and sent on various patrols in the 1920s. And from there, they would see limited use as training ships, going in for rebuild and reconstruction in 1934, running through 1937, and then seeing limited use in the Second Sino-Japanese War. During their reconstruction, they pretty much got the same treatment as the Fusos. Their anti-aircraft abilities were upgraded. New armor was added. Their engines were updated and modernized. So on and so forth. And at this point, they would actually climb up to about 42,000 tons displacement and would be just under 710 feet long. They would also see their maximum speed increase to 25 knots, so about a half knot faster than the upgraded Fuso class. However, by 1940, these are still considered to be obsolete ships even after the modernization, so they played a very secondary role, secondary use in 1940, 1941. Again, just sorting out to support fleet actions where they never really actually engaged the enemy. They were just kind of there and used on and off. Now, originally I said it was going to be the Fusos that were updated, but it turned out to be the Ises. Of course, Japan lost a great deal of its carrier attack force in 1942 after the Battle of Midway, and by this point it was clear that battleships were no longer the prime factor for a surface navy. It was the aircraft carrier. So, one solution, they had old battleships. Why not make them into carriers? So the Ises were selected, and work began on the conversion in February of 1943. So this model here is Ise, as seen in 1944, after her reconstruction. And they did not have the money or the time or the resources to do a full carrier conversion, so they literally did a half conversion. They pulled the rear two turrets off, using actually quite a bit of the armor and whatnot from the turrets for other things. They installed a flight deck in the back. It was about 230 feet long, about 95 feet wide. They still left the two middle turrets now, technically becoming the two rear turrets. And they still had the two front turrets, so there were still a total of 8 14-inch guns. And they removed pretty much all of the secondary 5.5-inch battery. And between all they added and took off, really, it only gained a little bit of weight. It was about 42,600 pounds. Or, yeah, that'd be interesting. 600 tons now, so not a whole lot more than it was before. They also added more radar type gear, as well as anti-aircraft guns. And the crew expanded to about 1,400 to 1,450 now. And the overall length, thanks to mostly the flight deck, how it overhung the back, is a little over 720 feet now. And they did a full conversion in a sense, because it does have an internal hangar, about 130 feet long, and it was intended to have an air group of 22 aircraft, 11 torpedo or dive bombers, and 11 reconnaissance planes. It had 2 catapults and other facilities. Well, the conversion didn't take all that long, but it never really had its full air group, and it never operated as an aircraft carrier. In 1943, after the conversion, while it was awaiting its pilots and aircraft, it was used as a troop transport and freight ship between Japanese-held islands. And it never really got its full air group. And even at this point, if it had had them, trained pilots, skilled pilots were in such short supply that it didn't really matter that Japan didn't have carriers. It had nothing to fly off of them getting into 1944. And this only became worse after the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot really wiped out a lot of the Naval Air Force. In the end, these would actually be used as decoys more than anything else a couple of different times, including during the invasion of Leyte Gulf. They would be used to try to draw off, somewhat successfully, Allied units. And believe it or not, they would actually survive 1944, both of them. Quite amazing. So getting into 1945, their last mission in February of that year was actually to pick up oil, minerals, other vital resources from Asia and deliver them to Japan. And they would dock at the naval yards in March, never to actually leave again after this one final mission. Japan did not have enough oil or even really trained crews to operate the ships at this point into the spring of 1945. So both Ise and Hyūga would be at their moorings and then be continuously bombarded by Allied bomber raids between March and July of that year. They did add extra anti-aircraft weaponry, trying to make them into floating AA batteries, but again, since this was the Japanese 25mm gun, for the most part, not all that effective, especially against newer Allied aircraft. So basically, both sank at their moorings after being punished for half a year while sitting there at dock, and pretty well neglected. And they would stay submerged for a bit, and then they would be raised and broken up for scrap in 1946 and 1947. The Ise Class was kind of the last of the older generation of battleships, right in between, like the Kawachi, and of course the final one, the Yamato classes. They would really be obsolete by World War II, but thanks to their 14-inch guns and just general oversize, they still had at least something to do in the modern battlefield. But World War II put into the whole battleship thing, really. But looking at this conversion, what they tried to make their battleships into, you can guess what became next, what became the predominant naval force after World War II. That would, of course, be the aircraft carrier. So in the next episode, we'll start looking at some Japanese carriers. If you have any questions or comments, please do post them below. And as always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Next time.